Yes, I think you can. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good lunch, and I look forward now to coming on to the last two sessions, which will take us up till 4 o'clock. The next session is entitled Victorian Values, Asian Values, Woke Values, Whose Will Win the Future? And of course, those values are not exactly distributed geographically. Asian values are very similar, as I think Lee Kuan Yew pointed out, to Mrs. Thatcher's Victorian values. Although Mrs. Thatcher was reprimanded by the distinguished economic historian Gertrude Himmelfarb when she said the correct term is Victorian virtues. And I think that there's quite a lot in that, and that the speakers may refer to it. Obviously, there are distinctively different values between the Anglosphere and continental Europe, and those values are not distributed evenly, of course. There are distinguished Europeans who are leading exemplars of what I'd think of as English virtues. I mean, particularly, for example, F.A. von Hayek. I once interviewed F.A. von Hayek and asked him in which country he felt most at home. And he said, oh, undoubtedly England. He'd started, obviously, in Austria. And when I pressed him further, where in England, he said, I prefer to be in the Reform Club more than anywhere else. And he then explained, he said it was in England, and in particular the Reform Club, where I discovered something about England that made me feel more at home than anywhere else. So I naturally asked him, what was that? He said, the English have the ability to break off a conversation without offending the other person. It never occurred to me, maybe Frank has some comments on that, but that certainly is the case, that some of the leading English virtues have been noticed and then celebrated by people who are not either at all English or not fully English, so to speak. A good example is Tom Stoppard, who says something slightly similar in his play about Russian emigres. And that is, he says, these people seem to have discovered a secret. They kind of practice liberty without having any idea about it. And again, that's something that might come up. But at the moment, we have two very distinguished commentators whose commentary goes far more deeply than most of the commentariats' efforts. First of all, we have who will open the discussion, conversation, or debate, Frank Furedi. Frank Furedi is originally Hungarian. Subsequently, he's moved to the Anglosphere, in particular to Canada, and later to England. And he has held an important position as a professor of sociology at Kent. And he's since returned to this country for part of the time and is now working for the Hungarian institution, the Matthias, I've forgotten the middle word, Collegium, MCC, in Brussels, which means that he is also encamped in the territory of the enemy, so to speak. And then after he has spoken, we'll be listening to Nathan Levine. Nathan Levine has made, in a very short time, a very big reputation on the internet, where in Substack he writes The Upheaval, which is a really powerful and, I think, philosophically very sophisticated internet set of reflections. The one that recently has attracted most attention is an article called The China Convergence, of some 90,000 words, which posits the theory that China and the United States are two different kinds of managerial society, one a soft and one a hard one. No prizes for guessing which. But has also recently written a very powerful analysis of the similarities between, on the one hand, some of the transhumanists' ideas, and secondly, those of the diabolical scientists, literally diabolical, in C.S. Lewis's novel, That Hideous Strength. These are the works of both men, very relevant to what we're discussing and very well worth reading and pondering. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce them both today. Frank, would you like to take the chair?
It's great to be here, back in my hometown. Thank you very much for the invitation. The subject that we're discussing is really, really important. I lived in England now for many, many years. I did my PhD there, my MA, and I got my first job at Kent University in Canterbury in '72, when English virtues still existed. And I never became English because I know that I can offend people even without trying. So I never got that understated, subtle way of being. But I do admire something very special about Britain, especially where I live in Kent, where in a town called Faversham, where it's still old school. People are decent, they help each other, they intuitively react, instinctively react against many of the wokish developments, and are the kind of people that almost, without a thought, without having to be convinced, would vote for Brexit, which is the only time I ever was on the winning side, when we managed to leave Europe, and who unthinkingly are polite and kind and nice to each other. So we have very different types of Englands, and in the world we have many conflicting tendencies. But I must take issue with some of the things that were said this morning. I think several people have talked about peak woke, that wokeism is now coming to an end. And I don't know what world they live in, because the world that I live in universities, but also in cultural institutions, it's very clear to me that wokeism is really just beginning. You have to remember that we've lost 4 generations of young people to wokish education. And just reflect on that. When you lose 4 generations of young people, we're talking about the people that are now running our judiciaries, they're running our universities, the BBC, and all kinds of public sector institutions, and they're really just getting in their stride. And that's something that we need to reflect upon, because whatever we want to do, however we want to fight these developments, if you have a group of teachers who are committed to these values, who live these values, who have internalized these values, and they're educating your children, then wokeism is not going to go away anytime soon. And I think there's a danger of thinking otherwise. I feel very strongly about this, because ever since 1979, when what's called political correctness kicked in, which is the original form of this, people have always asked me, Frank, when is this silly political correctness going to come to an end? And all my conservative friends were laughing at it. Ho, 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 ho. They're saying chairperson instead of chairman. Isn't that really funny? And every time some new word was invented, ho, 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 ho. How long is this foolishness going to last? Not realizing that actually it's going to last a very, very long time, because for decades and decades and decades, wokeism was never fought. The culture wars was a one-sided affair, to the point at which we had conservative governments, like under Theresa May, who were complicit in the promotion of transgenderist ideology, who were complicit in promoting Black Lives kind of stuff, who were complicit in turning our schools into factories of indoctrination. So wokeism isn't going to go away, and I'm just talking about Europe here. I think America is probably even worse. Certainly Canada, where I grew up, is like a woke jungle now. I mean, it is the kind of stories I could tell you is unbelievable. Australia, I mean, good old Australia. I used to remember going to Australia, and you had the battlers there, and all these people who had really strong, conservative, pioneering kind of views. You go to places like Sydney now, never mind Melbourne. I mean, Melbourne is like unbelievable, and you see that there is this consensus to the point at which a lot of white Australians are apologetic about being white and being Australian. And you got this dark interpretation of history where somehow, everything that Australians have ever done in human history is a story of shame. So we do have a very big problem here. And the problem relates to the Anglosphere. Because, let's be honest about this. Earlier on we talked about, I think Marek was talking about the fact that the Anglosphere stood for Western civilization. Well, the most systematic attack against Western civilization is being waged in the Anglosphere. It's in the United States, it's in Britain, it's in Australia and Canada, that the very word civilization, never mind Western civilization, but civilization is seen as being too exclusive. It doesn't really take into account the need for diversity and inclusion. And Western civilization is seen as something that we should criticize and be ashamed of. Now, there have been moments in human history where there were apologies being made by Europeans and Americans about their own civilization, but not like now. Because now what's happening is critics of Western civilization don't just simply give a throwaway remark, Western civilization, imperialism, slavery. They actually go through everything in our past that we believe in and we should cherish, and systematically sabotage and destroy it. There's now a literature on ancient Greece, because they know that ancient Greece is in some shape or form the foundation of many of our virtues, many of the ideals that we stand for. They systematically go through ancient Greece, particularly Athens, and they say, oh, Aristotle. Well, Aristotle, it turns out, was not only anti-gay and anti-trans, but it turns out that Aristotle is the father of white supremacy. And there's all these books being written about the way that Greek philosophy was really a doctrine that provides the starting point. The reason why they do it is because they know that if they can delegitimate Greek culture, Greek democracy, Greek philosophy, if they can delegitimate that, then they take away the very foundation on which Western ideals are based upon. That's really why they're doing it. And then they don't stop with Greece. They then go on to someone like Shakespeare. And if you look at the new books written on Shakespeare, I mean, Shakespeare is being accused as providing the ideological support for slavery, for racism, and a variety of other stuff. And new books are being written by people working for the Globe Theatre in London. Globe Theatre is where Shakespeare's stuff gets done, where they rewrite Shakespearean plays. So they rewrite Othello by making it, by using words that are very racist, that Shakespeare never used. And when you ask them, well, why do you use these words in the play? They say, because that's really what Shakespeare meant. So they know better than Shakespeare what he really meant. So it's almost like there's a psychoanalysis in reverse that kind of goes back and forth. So I could go on and on and on, but basically the point I like to make is that Anglosphere today in the 21st century is the place where what I call California values are most strongly entrenched. It doesn't mean to say that everybody buys into it, because it's a very polarized society, but certainly the cultural sphere and the political establishment, in many cases, even the right-wing political establishment, is quite complicit in betraying the culture and the background that they come from. So I think that today, the idea of Anglosphere has become something of a fantasy. It's a fantasy that is shown by the kind of values that are in ascendancy, not just the woke values, but the other values that are in ascendancy. Now, there are counter trends. So, for example, when I argued with some of my colleagues in Brussels, showed that the Anglosphere is globally turned out to be very fragile and very weak because of its problem with its own values and its own beliefs, they could point out to me, but yes, that's true, but nevertheless, there are certain things about the Anglosphere that is really strong. So the one thing that the Anglosphere got going for itself is soft power. American soft power, the projection of California values, is still very, very strong, even in Asia. If you go to some of the big cities in Asia, if you go to Africa, you'll find that these kind of values are gaining strength, particularly amongst the middle class. In places like Bangalore, in Beijing, you find that people are beginning to parent their children in accordance with the way California values dictate to them. So it's still very important. And of course, we have the privileged status of the English language. I know when I went to Hong Kong, it was interesting to find out that Cantonese, Chinese, when they talk to some other groups of Chinese people, do not converse in Mandarin, but they were talking to each other in English because that was easier for them to do. So soft power is still very important. And when I was doing some research on Islamism, I got this problem. I have a very bad social life. And when you guys are out partying on a Saturday night, I do things like watch jihadist videos because I'm very interested in Islamism. And when you watch these jihadist videos, they're horrible videos, but the music is really good. And it's all good rap music, sort of, and it's about kill the kafir, sort of, but they're really good beat. And you can see that even Islamic subculture has been influenced by that kind of value system, by that kind of soft power that emanates from the United States in particular. However, I think there's a number of things that we need to take into account when we're talking about the Anglosphere, but also because when I talk about the Anglosphere, its problems, I'm talking about the problems that people in Hungary or Poland or Romania are going to have tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I just think that this is very important to realize that Central Europe is not immune from these influences, and certainly already in Budapest, in Warsaw, in Bucharest, all these places, you can see how many of these ideals have captured the imagination of the young. Because the young in Budapest watch Netflix, they listen to music on MTV, and they have the same language, they adopt the same language and mannerisms as their peers do in the Western part of the world. So we are talking about something that is, in many ways, unfortunately, quite global. There is one important development since the author of the book on Anglosphere published his book, which is that the elites that run English-speaking societies are very different than the ones in the past. That kind of waspish sort of traditional elite in the United States, the old establishment in England, no longer exists. And they no longer have that noblesse oblige, that ethos of responsibility that they once had in previous times. In many ways, the elites that run society are a counterculture elite. They kind of came into being by opposing the culture that pre-existed their existence. They're against the culture of their grandparents and their ancestors. And they make a virtue of the fact that they denounce everything from the past as being outdated. The word outdated appears so regularly in the documents that they write that it's almost, we don't even notice it anymore. So yesterday, for example, in England, a head of a school got fined £9,000 because she happened to make a joke at one of the teachers by saying, "You look really fit in a Speedo like one of those swimwears." Now, it's a kind of joke that is fairly, I make far worse jokes routinely all the time, but nevertheless, the tribunal ruled that she was guilty of using an outdated language. I thought the word outdated was very interesting because what she was saying is that talking like this was okay in the past, but we no longer talk like this. And when everything, the words we use, for example, the word female is not considered to be outdated, then what we're doing is we're detaching our society from its organic roots with previous experience. So that's, I think, is really quite important as far as the elite culture is concerned, because what's happening is that the new establishment is self-consciously detaching itself from its past. And part of this past is that sensibility of being part of this Anglo-American world. That, in America, there's a kind of sense of shame about that world. In Britain, the flag can no longer be flown. If you want to be a member of the establishment, you fly the rainbow flag. But the idea that somehow the Union Jack, the flag of Britain, can be proudly shown is something that is no longer done. And in fact, the police have, on several occasions, told people with the Union Jack not to kind of fly it because it's very right-wing. It's almost fascistic, is the way that they kind of perceive it. So the symbols of the past are really being destroyed by the people that run these kinds of societies. And what you have, and this is something that I particularly see when I go to America, is a kind of political orientation that's detached from the past. But because it's detached from the past, it cannot really look towards the future. It hasn't got the intellectual, moral resources to look towards the future, and therefore it's become really, really presentist. I mean, America is presentist to the point at which it doesn't do anything that is really, I'm talking about the government now because there are entrepreneurs who are a little bit different, that is really relevant for the future. If you look at American infrastructure, right, and what's happened to the roads and the railways and everything, it does resemble sort of the worst of East Europe in the interwar period or during the Stalinist era. So there's a kind of reluctance to look to the future, to build towards the future, which is really important. The number of values that have displaced good old Anglosphere virtues, which are dominant. The one that I often see as being critically important, and the one that I first noticed, I wrote a book called The Culture of Fear about 30 years ago, is risk aversion. I mean, I always think that one of the nice things about 19th century Britain, about Victorian virtues, was the willingness to take risks and to experiment and to try things out. That has changed to the point at which the word risk has been redefined. When I was a young guy in Hungary, I was like 6, this is in the middle of the Stalinist period, my father would often tell me, Feri, which is my name in Hungarian, Frank, why don't you go for it? This is a good risk. And he would use the word good risk all the time. And sometimes he would say, no, I don't think that's a good risk, that's a bad risk. So there were all these different judgments being made. Today, the idea of using the term a good risk is a sign of irresponsibility, because risk by itself is now equated with danger, and therefore what we have to do is to manage risks so that risk becomes something that we insulate ourselves from rather than grab the opportunities. Now, fortunately, there are still a lot of people who are prepared to take risks, but they are the countercultural ones. They're going against the grain by taking risks because risk aversion has become really quite important. We look at geopolitics. One of the things that I'm struck by when you look at the Anglosphere, when I look at the military in the Anglosphere, is casualty aversion, the fear of taking casualties, and the whole strategic orientation of the military, the new military doctrines that have come out of from American military thinkers, is based upon minimizing the number of casualties, of fighting wars in such a way that American soldiers don't come home in bags, and not realizing that if you have that as a key element, and not only that, but just the other week, West Point has decided to change its motto. So there used to be the motto of West Point, I usually might not remember it, is courage, duty, and loyalty. And they decided I would take that off, even though it's been around for, sort of since the 19th century. And when they were asked why they're taking it off, I think they tried to fudge the issue by saying it doesn't look very good from a public relations point of view. But actually, the casual way in which issues like duty and courage were somehow stripped out of the military ethos of the American sort of military officer caste is extremely worrying. Because what it tells me, particularly with the casualty-averse attitudes, is you do have the end of what we used to call the warrior ethos, which is linked to Greece, that whole sense of courage, all these things being important. And I say this because if you're talking about geopolitics, you've got to ask the question of when was the last time that America has won a war? Possibly Desert Storm, but I think that when you look at it, maybe not. When I look back upon what's happened militarily, the only time America had a clear victory in a war is when it invaded the little island of Grenada, right? But when you look at what happened in Somalia, Libya, Iraq, I mean, when you look around just the general experience, you have this development that's never happened before in human history. And that is that for the first time in human history, the strongest military power in the world, America is still the strongest, at least in terms of hardware, in terms of resources. The strongest military power in the world is not winning wars. I mean, how could that be? It goes against the grain. It's completely goes against, it's counterintuitively goes against everything we know from what's happened in the past. And I think that the fact that America is not winning wars is directly connected to the loss of warrior ethos, which is directly connected to casualty aversion, which is directly connected to risk aversion, and it's directly connected to the same set of orientations that has created a very wokish public culture within these societies. So that's kind of now. Earlier on, somebody mentioned the fact that the Anglosphere is great because of its commitment to freedom, to common law, to all the good things about everything to do with Britain from the Magna Carta onwards. Well, let's look at the role of freedom now and the attitude of our people that run society today. When you look at, for example, I'm sure that Nathan will know this, the discussion in the Supreme Court about the First Amendment, the casual manner with which Supreme Court judges talk about the First Amendment as being a barrier to controlling sort of disinformation, sort of is worrying. These are the judges. These are the judges that are, are playing the most important authoritative role in society, and yet when it comes to free speech, they are really very casual about it. Now, there's something even more important when it comes to freedom. If you look down the court systems, I'm not talking with the Supreme Court judges, but all the other courts in all the Anglosphere, they went to the same law school. And in every single law school that I know of, I'm a university professor, so I check these things out. In every single law school that you go and study in, what do you learn? What do these judges to be learn? Well, they learned what's called critical legal theory. And critical legal theory is the legal expression of critical theory in other domains. And these are the judges. So these judges having been educated into critical legal theory, which is inherently anti-freedom, which looks down on the common law, because common law is what those primitive people really believe. I think the jury system, which is one of the best things about the Anglosphere, that the jury system, is outdated. Right? These are the judges that are meant to be protecting our freedoms, when they themselves are almost intuitively, instinctively against freedom. And this can be seen most clearly, and this is the final point that I want to make, in the way in which what you have in the Anglosphere, the situation where the safety, security, and freedom trade-off, which relates to everything that I said, almost invariably come down on the side of safety, almost invariably comes down on the side of security in a kind of Hobbesian way against freedom. Finally, I think that this is something that was very strongly recommended and idealized in the book on Anglosphere that you wrote way back, is the open society argument. Now, the open society is something really important, but was very important in the Anglosphere. But today, the open society and public service has been displaced by what they call civil society. I don't know if you heard the expression, and the civil society is anything but civil, because what the civil society is a network of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, who arrogate for themselves the right to sort of speak in public. So, yeah, I could go on and on about the end of meritocracy. I could go on every single value that most of us in this room believe in, but I just want to end by saying what I started on, which is that the kind of wokist ideology that's been institutionalized is very, very important. And it's not an ideology like any other ideologies, because many of them don't even know what it is they believe in, but nevertheless, they instinctively react in the same kind of way to anything that goes. So, for example, when I go to a dinner party in London, and I know that these people are into gay marriage, they think gay marriage is the high point of human civilization, if they're into transgenderist ideology, if they think that Black Lives Matter is really worthy of their support, you absolutely know, you don't need to examine it. You know that when it comes to a war in Israel, they will instinctively side with Hamas. And it's not that they thought about it, because they can barely spell Gaza, never mind know really what's going on there, but nevertheless, they know that something is drawing them towards supporting Hamas. And what is it that drawing them together? What spontaneously draws them together? I think in one or two words, it's basically their hatred for Western civilization. And it's that hatred for Western civilization which emanates from the Anglo-American way of life at the moment, from the Anglosphere, that is the biggest threat, I think, to not just to humanity, but to a decent democratic way of life. So we've got to fight it, really understand it and fight it, and take no prisoners. Thank you.
So this is billed as a debate, but I'm not sure I have enough to disagree with to make it a debate. But I think it could be a productive discussion. Thank you, Frank. I think maybe I'll start with what I think is an important clarification, because we've been talking about woke ideas today. And I think that there is a misunderstanding, perhaps, including in some of the discussions today, that wokeism, if we want to call it that, is a extreme ideology of the left and sort of comes at the establishment from the outside and has taken over certain institutions successfully and disrupted them, but that the center is sort of still holding or is taken over by them to some degree. And what I would say is that this is a big misunderstanding. Wokeism, this collection of ideas, sort of radical ideas, is a tool of what we might call the extreme center. It is a product and tool of the establishment, not the radical left, although it's certainly a left-wing ideology. But if we think of across the Western world, what the establishment center is that it is what we might call a managerial regime. And what that means is, well, it's in the name, the essence of the governing establishment is managerialism. And managerialism is the idea that everything should be managed from the top down by a technocratic class of expertise, or the managerial class. And we see this sort of everywhere in the West today to varying degrees. And if you think about what wokeism is, these various ideas about race and gender and so on, all of which sort of incorporate the idea that things could be more equal or equitable, and we need to, or inclusive or diverse, and we need to change society in certain ways to make that happen. Well, all of this is a means for which the managerial class will become needed to further manage society from the top down. So we need more equity, racial equity, therefore we need a new government bureaucracy to manage society to be more equitable. We need college to be more inclusive, so we're going to create a new class of managers within the bureaucracy of the colleges, an entire HR bureaucracy, in order to manage this diversity and inclusion. We need our boardrooms to be more diverse, so we're going to have an HR bureaucracy in every single corporation in order to manage it. So every single element of what we call woke is an extremely useful tool for the managerial class. And I mean that beyond the government. I mean HR managers and so on, lawyers, huge profit for lawyers in woke. Now, if you think about what's happening across Europe, what we're seeing is the integration of woke into the managerial technocracy in a manner that is extremely advantageous for that establishment center. And I mean that because it gives them, let's say, an excuse to manage society in a more strict, even authoritarian way. So when we have things like the new hate speech laws in Scotland, or in Ireland, or in Germany, there's many of them now, what they are is a means of using ideology, ideas about inequity, to impose a new order of management on society at every level, from the top down. Now, this is why I agree with Frank that the idea that wokeism is going away is a huge misunderstanding. Even if certain ideas that are talked about in the press all the time as culture war issues were to be sort of toned down or shelved, what wokeism really is a means of managerial authoritarianism, even totalitarianism, if we want to call it that, because it infiltrates the total area of life. It's a means for the government, the state, and really it's beyond the state because of the network of NGOs and so on that you mentioned, Frank, an entire regime of managers to manage an ever-increasing area of life in every country in Europe, and in doing so, to militate against democracy, that is democratic sovereignty of the people, and transfer that power to different levels, a higher level of management, whether that is at the national level or at the supranational level, as a means of using that ideological basis to essentially create a new form of government. So, when we see things like the European Union implementing speech controls at a wide level with the Digital Services Act, for instance, I would say that is woke values triumphant. When you have certain governments using the legal system to essentially purge their political opponents on the allegation that they are extremists or far right or populists or whatever they're labeled, I'd say that's woke values in action. And it doesn't matter if they're talking about, transgenderism or whatever. This is all of a piece. And so what we're really seeing is a clash of systems of governance. And that's why I find the title of this panel very interesting: Victorian values, Asian values, woke values. Now, when we think about Asian values, that's a quite ambiguous term. We might say the best known Asian values, the most influential, is Chinese values. Well, the Chinese Communist Party is a managerial regime. It tries to manage every aspect of life. It uses an ideology to do that, the left-wing ideology of communism, even today. Now, it's a much more brutal regime than any in the West, certainly. But I think when we talk about Asian values and woke values, to me, those are very similar. Because well, I shouldn't say Asian values, Chinese Communist Party system and the woke system that we're seeing emerge in Europe and in the Anglosphere, as Frank mentioned. Those are headed to the same destination of a system that attempts to manage every aspect of life and brooks no dissent. Now, okay, so the question is, who's going to win these values, Victorian values? Well, let me start with, is woke going to end? I think that in a sense, woke will end, in that these values have a big problem. And the problem is that they are self-negating. They're self-destructive, as Frank went over and others have mentioned. And so my view is they will end, but who knows when. We now have things like, naval ships catching fire in port and planes falling out of the sky, and things seem to be sort of accelerating towards the collapse, almost like the Soviet Union with its ideological system, once that had crystallized. But who knows how long that will take. But what I would say is that the propagation of woke values may have helped the regimes of the West internally to combat their political enemies, that is the populist right, essentially. And by populist, I mean the democratic reaction to this technocratic centralization of power. But when we look at the rest of the world, I don't think that those values, woke values, in that system is especially attractive to much of the world, in the developing world, let's say. And I think we're already seeing a sort of divergence in the world beyond the West when it comes to who's going to lead on values. Hungary is a great place to talk about this because I think, in a sense, Hungary has found itself on the other side of the line of this sort of emerging system of woke regimes in Europe. And therefore, it has been essentially vilified or punished by the European Union and others. And as a result, Hungary has sort of by necessity had to align itself more with what we might call Asian values. The sort of emerging, let me redefine Asian values slightly. I think there is a certain system that is emerging in the world, not only in Asia, say in Singapore or elsewhere, but also in places like the Middle East, that is essentially a authoritarian system, we can say that, say in the United Arab Emirates. This is an authoritarian regime, but it's a very orderly regime. It's very productive. And it's authoritarian, but it's not totalitarianism. By that I mean, if you're a family in the United Arab Emirates, you might not be able to trash the government in your speech, but the government doesn't invade your home and tell you, monitor what you say, and if you commit any speech or thought crimes, you're in trouble. That's not really how it works. And I think essentially what we're seeing in the world today is this system in places like the Gulf states is succeeding very well because it's still a meritocratic system. It's still a system that allows for some connection with reality when it comes to things like economic policy. And that seems to be winning the field while the West is sort of self-absorbed with these battles over woke. So I would posit that that is one value system that is in competition here. And I think if nothing changes, that sort of system is what we're going to see increasingly win the day in countries around the world, as opposed to Anglosphere values, as we were talking about before, or woke values as we think of them, generally speaking. Now, the last values on this list here I find very interesting, Victorian values. I'm not sure who came up with that or put it on there, but I didn't. Mrs. Thatcher, it's a quote from Mrs. Thatcher. Okay. Well, what I find very interesting about it is, the Victorian era was a reaction. It was a reactionary era. And it was a reaction to the Georgian era, which was essentially a very licentious, chaotic, sort of woke era, where anything sort of went. And the young generation that became the Victorian generation sort of had a tremendous cultural awakening and reaction against that era and what we might call a social conservative revolution. So it seems to me that that is possible today. We may see that in the West. I don't know how likely that is, but I think that that is sort of the West's only hope at this point, that there will be a sort of young conservative counter-revolution to the woke revolution. Otherwise, the West may be in trouble vis-a-vis the values of the rest of the world.
Well, thank you very much. Now we've had two very thoughtful and interesting and powerful presentations. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions and see where we proceed. What about the set of values we call conservatism, particularly in the English-speaking world, which is in fact a defense of the old values in the main? Does that have any independent power? It's usually, when such arguments are presented, arguments based on conservatism, they are generally dismissed in two ways. One, they are mere nostalgia, and the other is when they seem to have more force, that they are racist, or in some form attacking minorities in a way. Could I ask you both to give me, in a sense, a forecast of where conservatism, the conservative values, stand, and what potential they have for change, or not?
I think that there is one problem, which is that conservatism has come to the party very late, in the sense that it grumbled about political correctness, it grumbled about all the stuff that we now call woke values but feminism and all the rest of it, but it just grumbled. And it fundamentally underestimated the significance of the culture wars. And it kind of was dominated by this fantasy that if you win the economic war, and if, for example, free markets and free market capitalism is in the ascendancy, then that will solve all the problems. And we have to remember, and this is very painful to some of my colleagues who were around at that time, which is that it was under the Thatcher and Reagan era that conservatives lost the culture wars. I mean, when you look at all the important developments, while they won the war against the Soviet Union and they won the economic war, when it came to culture, it was precisely at that time that all the cultural institutions were gradually falling one by one. So they came to the party very, very late, and I still think that a lot of conservatives do not understand the problem. I think that's something that is partially, I was talking to Nathan before, and it's partially generational. They just don't understand what it is they're fighting against. So almost every conservative colleague that I have think that what wokeism is the 1960s revolution of sort of hardcore leftists going to university, and now they've realized that now they won. Whereas what Nathan was arguing quite correctly is that wokeism is a top-down accomplishment, and the most active proponents of wokeism today are the corporates. And if you look at the Harvard Business Review, look at all these business publications, they are sort of 100% committed to these ideologies. So first of all, we got to understand the enemy. And secondly, I think the challenge that we have is we got to get young people on our side, because these conflicts, if conservatism is going to flourish, it will have to capture the imagination of the younger generation, inspire them. And I'm actually hopeful, because living in Brussels, which is a horrible place, I don't really advise anybody to move there. Living in Brussels, you do become exposed to not just to the bad stuff, but to the good things. And contrary to what we think, many of these populist movements are attracting young people. I mean, someone like sort of the head of the president of the Ralliement National, Jordan Butler, is the most popular figure in France, and he's got the charisma. And if you go to any of their meetings, the people there are not old age pensioners. They are, by and large, in their early 20s. A disproportionate number of them are women. I was quite surprised by that. And they even had young black and North African people coming along to those meetings. I think you get a very similar development in Sweden and Holland. Holland is a very good example. Who voted for Wilders? It was disproportionately the young. So there is a possibility there. And what we got to make sure is that this doesn't become just an epiphenomenon, but we're able to. I think we have a big job on our hands. We have to give real meaning to conservative values, rather than just simply repeat what Edmund Burke said or repeat what people said in the past. We have to find a new language through which tradition, respect for the past, respect for family, respect for religion, all these things are, become sexy. I mean, that's really the way that I see it, rather than allowing the other side to kind of occupy this particular space of appealing to the youth. And I'm convinced it can be done, but it's something that we got to recognize the challenge that we face, and then sort of stand up and fight.
I'd like to ask the same question actually to you, Nathan, but in particular to ask you to expand on your reference to Hungary here, because if Hungary is a form of conservatism, it's a distinctive one at the moment. And how do you think it is working? Would you try to describe it and suggest how it's working out?
Well, I think it is distinctive, but it's only distinctive in that Hungary is the only, especially now that there's been a change in government in Poland, Hungary is sort of the only country where this is manifesting at a national level, at a level of policy in which the government tries to implement conservative ideas. But the same ideas are present all over Europe in the Anglosphere. They just haven't sort of had a chance to establish themselves in government. Now, I very much agree with Frank on what he said about conservatism. One thing is that I think we sort of alluded to it earlier today, this idea of conservatism as cherishing the free market, which I think is true. But I think conservatives across the Western world have for decades sort of been swindled by this assumption that the free market meant supporting big business and corporations, and the corporations would automatically be on their side because conservatives were pro-business. Now, one thing to understand about wokeism is we talk about things like woke capitalism, and conservatives sort of sneer that that's an oxymoron. That's not an oxymoron, that's a tautology. Capitalism in the sense of not the free market, so to speak, of which I'm a great supporter, but the idea that we should promote consumerism among the populace. Wokeism is ideal for that kind of capitalism, because whenever you shatter the limitations and bonds on people, whenever you liberate them from responsibilities and duties, such as to the family or to any kind of moral responsibility, you're opening up the door to greater consumption, to a greater ability to be sold things by capitalism. So if you make drugs more legal, then you can sell more drugs. If you make pornography more legal, you can sell more pornography. So this idea that you liberate people from restraints is very much part of wokeism, and therefore I think is the key reason why the corporate sector is very much supportive of wokeism. And I think a big problem for conservatives is that they're stuck in this idea that they are aligned with the corporate world when they're not. The corporate world has found a juicier patron than them now, and so they're sort of until they can get over that, they're in real trouble. But on your broader question, John, I agree with Frank that there is some hope here for conservatism, in the sense that young people I think there is a real chance that young people could go conservative, if we want to call it that, in the sense of the Victorian Revolution I mentioned. And the reason is that, what are young people? Young people are always rebellious. They always rebel against the status quo because, how else are they going to establish their identity compared to their parents? Well, they want to be transgressive against the system that they're in. And wokeism sort of tells young people that to be transgressive, you have to, revolt against Western civilization. But I think that it's starting to become clear, even to them, that they are not the resistance, they are not the rebels, they are the establishment. That every single power center in society is woke. So they are not revolting against anything. If you really want to be transgressive today, then you get married young and have a family, and maybe you convert to Christianity. That'll really piss off your boomer parents. And so that is the new transgression, to be conservative. So at that point, maybe we shouldn't call it conservatism at all. It might need to be called something like traditionalism, because you're no longer conserving the status quo, but revolting against the status quo in the hope of a better society. And I think that is sort of the future for conservatism, is the hope that to make conservatism cool and transgressive, that to be a counterculture, like in the 60s, that is a tremendously powerful position to be in for anyone. It has all kinds of advantages.
I think it's true to say that wokeism in the West occurs in conditions of formal democracy, which is an obstacle to the managerialists, and one which leads them in very interesting ways to pervert the democratic system. In other words, the democracy is there, a constant threat to them, and they want to keep it asleep as much as they can. And in a way, they have constructed a series of institutions which manage to go around democracy. Now, this is quite a big topic, but let me just apply it to the recent referendums in Ireland, which were expected. First of all, the system that they used was, in a sense, to partly take formal power from the government and give it to NGOs. And the NGOs were the agents of the government. They were generally, by the way, financed by the government, which should have tipped people off. That's not always true in other countries, but in Ireland it was very true. And the result was the institutions pretended to be performing the work of politics, discussing, debating. But the recommendations they made to the government, which were embodied in these two referendums, were not what the people wanted at all or had proposed. They all came from these organizations that purported to represent groups in the people. The National Women's Council, for example, recommended word for word the actual referenda. But the women voters rejected it by 2-1 in one case, 3-1 in another. And secondly, the National Women's Council was passing resolutions demanding that the government deplatform so-called gender feminists who are critical of the transgender, the incorporation of transgenderism in the LGBT list of grievances. And the government set these bodies up, got them to propose reforms, announced that these reforms had the support of the whole of the culture of society, of all the mainstream legal institutions, all the cultural institutions, and still they were defeated by 2-1 and 3-1. Now, I've taken a long time to explain that because I now want the two of you to discuss what the defeat of those referendums means.
Well, it was a really great experience, and you have to understand that this came in the context of the beginning of the Irish farmers' protest. We're in MCC Brussels. We have a network of farmers groups in Spain, Ireland, Holland, and we're acting as a network for them to share experiences, because they are, to use a Marxist language, what's left of the working class. I mean, they're the only people in Europe that still work with their hands and understand and have a different kind of experience than anywhere else. And, you know, from a conservative point of view, the preservation of rural communities is absolutely vital, because they've always been the mainstay of any kind of conservative culture. So you had that. You had the protest against mass migration. I don't know if you know that mass migration in Ireland has reached epidemic proportions, to the point at which there are bits of Dublin where you kind of struggle to find an Irish person that was born in Ireland. And it's happened very, very fast, much faster than in Germany. And the proportion of migrants that have come into Irish people that were born in Ireland is far worse than it is anywhere else in Europe at the moment. So you had that as a context. And I think what you had was essentially, and this is the wonderful thing, every single mainstream political party from left to right supported the referendum, including Sinn Féin. And every single of these parties was rejected by their own base. So Sinn Féin, which is in the ascendancy in the South, 80% of Sinn Féin supporters voted against their own leadership. And that tells me something. A day later, I was in Paris giving a talk to the Rassemblement National people, and they were asking me, you know, sort of, what's the lesson that I draw from Ireland? And I said, the lesson I draw from this is that democracy can work, and the more democracy becomes direct democracy, the more chance that we have in getting our voices heard. And that was the Brexit experience. That's the Irish experience. And therefore, we should really be asking for referendums on everything that matters to us. So if they're putting in a new policy on marriage or on, you know, sort of on gender identity, we have to basically say, oh, yeah, okay, that's an interesting policy. Let's put it to the vote. Let the people decide. So at the moment, one of the most horrible things about the European Union leadership, the Eurocrats, is they got this policy of mainstreaming gender in every policy. So if a Hungarian or a Polish or a German theater group wants to get money from Brussels, they have to tick the boxes that they are inclusive. They're going to have transgender ladies and men, you know, in their committee and everything else. And it sounds like Stalinism, but all done through identity politics. We've got to put these things to the vote, because what Ireland shows is that the people, normal human beings, actually instinctively reject a lot of these kinds of policies. And I think in the end, the point you're making, John, about the NGOs is really important. We're doing a research project on the NGOs in Brussels, because they create all these policies. And if you look at the secret and semi-secret network that they've created, the way they're financed, often secretly, it's not a deep state, but it is an alternative state. It creates a kind of insulated democracy where they make the decisions that the public should be, you know, involved in. But I tell you, the Irish referendum was the best thing that happened in Europe for a very, very long time, especially in Ireland, because, as you know, Ireland became the good boys of the European Union, the model colony of the European Union. And even there, if the Irish could do this, then it demonstrates that it's possible for similar things to occur everywhere else in Europe.
It's very interesting, I think, just to comment on that last point, that some of these institutions are known as para-state institutions. And that, of course, is the term that was used for the economic institutions under fascism. They were, in a sense, part of government was what's the word? Corporate, well, sent out and given to formally private institutions, companies, to implement. But over to you on NGOs.
Well, I agree on the referenda. I think another very good example was the referenda on the voice in Australia. This idea that identity politics would be inserted into the Constitution of Australia formally was sort of assumed that it would pass, and then it was, you know, defeated in a landslide. So we see this over and over again. The actual people, the body politic of nations around the world, are much more conservative than the managerial elites who ruled them. And every time there's a referendum, we see that. Oftentimes we see that in sort of formal votes. I mean, that's what the election of Donald Trump, say, was sort of this rebellion of the populace against the establishment, the managerial establishment. And I think, in fact, much of the politics we're seeing today, sort of the craziness of the politics, is essentially a battle between democracy, that is what the people want and are voting for, and the sort of frenzied reaction against democracy from the top down to try to suppress that that instinct, that conservative instinct of the general populace. And so we get this very bizarre situation where managerial elites across the West are describing an attack on democracy that is occurring. And they use this language all the time, sometimes calling it our democracy, which is very telling. But what do they mean by democracy? They don't mean the system of voting by the public to inject popular will into the system of governments. They mean, by democracy, they mean civil society. And they'll often talk about civil society. And so what civil society is all the organizations and bureaucracies and processes that make up the system of governance that are beyond democratic accountability. So the giant network of parastate institutions that are no one voted for. So you'll hear, for example, in American media, a complaint about, say, Donald Trump, if he's reelected, wants to launch a political attack on the civil service to fire more of the bureaucrats. But of course, that is an attempt to bring democratic accountability from the executive to the civil service, which is otherwise no one voted for. So it's sort of the opposite, and there's this big language game about democracy going on, including in places, all over the world. And so I think that Frank is right, that essentially despite this centralization of power in the managerial state, these managers are still very afraid of democracy, of the ability of the people to gum up the gears of the flawless function of the managerial machine. And so I think that's why we see this sort of constant attempt now to fortify the state or the broader civil society against democratic influence by sort of, that's what the mis and disinformation game is all about, is to try to limit information in order to prevent the public from interfering in the managerial state, for example.
On a very narrow point here, if you were writing a play about this, a spokesman for the managerial class would be self-consciously manipulative, wouldn't he? I love those speeches in Shaw, which the Superman explains everything perfectly and wittily and cynically. In fact, I'll give an example. In Misalliance, a young socialist bursts in and threatens an upper-middle-class weekend house party and announces he's a socialist. He's the new man that you people have not taken into account. And then one of the characters turns to a colonial governor and says, well, what's your reply to that? How would you, he says, what's your reply to me? How would you handle me? And very evenly and agreeably, the colonial governor says, oh, well, that's very simple, really. I would ask to see a promising young policeman, able young man, wants to get ahead. I would tell him you were a bit of a nuisance, a danger to the community, couldn't tell what you would do next. So he'd follow you around, be always at your heels, tread on your heels and so on and so forth. And eventually you'd snap back and hit him or something like that, and we'd have you. And the young socialist says, why, that's absolutely outrageous. Because, of course, he himself was a product of liberal Victorian society, and when the underside of reality was presented to him, he was as shocked as the colonial governor was not. So, I mean, that's the kind of situation. But do these people, are they self-consciously aware of what they are doing, or are they moved by their own slogans and really believe them?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Orwell talked about the inner party and the outer party, right? That there's an inner core that knows what's going on and is sort of very cynical and doesn't actually believe the ideology, and there's an outer core who is motivated by the ideology, but they don't really know what's going on. That may be the case. But I think that, like the movie villains, sometimes they just sort of come out and say it, like Ursula von der Leyen at the World Economic Forum a little while ago, who said that, you know, disinformation is the greatest problem facing mankind, more than climate change or the war in Ukraine, or she listed several things. And she said, you know, disinformation's at the top, which basically means these damn peasants, we gotta keep them from talking so we can keep it going. You know, they're really quite open about it sometimes.
I just say something on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, it's very interesting. In my writings, I call what binds them together an ideology without a name, because it's got certain ideological dimensions to it, but it's not a self-conscious, explicit ideology the way that liberalism, communism, social, any of these things were in the past. But nevertheless, I think what is very interesting is that there's a kind of understanding, a tacit understanding about what is the problem and how to react, and a common disappointment in people and a common hatred of the masses, that they really are very uncomfortable with democracy, which is why they practice insulated forms of democracy, where they outsource decision-making as much as possible to any kind of other institutions. Now, the giveaway for me, because there is something that binds them together, and this is especially for the Hungarians in this audience, there's a word they use all the time, which is the word awareness, because they see themselves as raising awareness. So whenever they introduce anything, you know, the first thing they do is they kind of denounce that as being outdated, and they basically justify, this is NGO types and also corporates, they justify the new thing that they brought in on the fact, not because the people have wanted it, because they're not reacting to popular demand, they decided to raise our awareness. Now, pause on the expression. If they're the awareness raisers, they assume that you and I are unaware. You know, we're fairly thick, a little bit stupid. We don't really understand what's going on. And in the very act of putting themselves into the position of being able to raise their awareness and seeing themselves as the aware, they've actually created this kind of cultural distinction between them and us. Yeah. And I think that's the critical the symbolic way in which they kind of constitute a certain kind of l'esprit de corps, which is not justified openly in terms of any kind of legitimate ideology, but it allows them to play that kind of managerial domination that you described.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's I think a very important point, and also gets to something important about what we call wokeism, but I would say the broader managerial regime, which is that this was not an outside force to liberalism, in my view, but a sort of natural evolution of what we might call progressive liberalism. Because what you're talking about, Frank, with this idea that everything is backwards, and they need to raise awareness, this is a product of progressivism in the sense of believing that there is a direction to history and a utopian future that we're all moving towards. And anyone who holds back that progression is by default immoral, because the future will always be better than the past. And anyone like a conservative who tries to hold back the future is in some way sabotaging that utopia. Now, obviously, anyone who lived under communism will recognize this sort of dichotomy. Moreover, just like the communists, they have a sense of we need to raise consciousness, a new consciousness, and some people are stuck in a false consciousness. That's us. The backwards people, the bigots, and so on. And so when words like misinformation are used, I think in some sense, at least many really do believe this in a sense, in that in this system of thought, the only way someone could be so immoral as to oppose the utopia of the unrealized future is to be profoundly misinformed, to be very uninformed and stupid and not using reason and unrational. And if we were just rational, if we could just learn from the experts of the managerial class to think properly, we would, of course, be willing to go along with the project. And so, in that sense, the obsession with information makes more sense. That if they could only get the right information to the low information voters, those voters would naturally go along with the project. And if they're not going along with the project, someone must be misinforming them and spreading this false information. And so there's a sort of sense that there's only one right side of history, and it's them, and they sort of have a divine mandate, therefore, to do whatever they want and correct the wrong people.
That was exactly the explanation in the Irish referenda that the government and its allies gave. But as in the voice referendum and as in the referendum in Chile, which prevented a left-wing new constitution being instituted, as in all those cases, the people originally started out, the voters, the electorate, in favor of these referenda, but the more they learned about it, the more they turned against it. So the argument used by the government and its friends was obviously the opposite of the truth. Look, we have one final question to you both. Yes, sure.
Because we haven't disagreed up to this point. Okay. I agree with everything that you said, but there's one point I see very differently, which is I think this is the first time that what we call progressivism hasn't got a utopian ambition. Because throughout the 20th century, the utopian element was very, very strong in there. But what I find is very unique about this wokeist ideology at the present is that although it wants to change people, I mean, it really wants to change people, it hasn't got a future-oriented vision. In fact, I call this a very presentist movement. It's stuck in the present because it's so much against the past. And I think that, to me, in fact, we should have a discussion on what's happened to utopias, because I think that that's one of the missing issues of our time. We had utopias, going back since we had them back in the Greek days, we had them in the 16th, 17th century, but today, in the 21st century, it's a utopia-free zone. And I think that tells us something about this group, about the fact that their ambition is a low-horizon ambition that's principally based not on changing the world, but about changing human beings through colonizing their internal life. And I think that's really what's kind of driving them. So I just wanted your reaction to that, because I desperately sort of want to have
I don't want to use all the remaining time, but I do sort of disagree, and I think they do have a utopian vision, and that is an interior vision in part. But, I mean, that's not any different from the past. I mean, communism also wanted to form a new man. Fascism wanted to form a new man. These are all managerial ideologies as well, who want to create something new from the top down, including a new man, as opposed to what I would describe as sort of the opposite, which is sort of a vision of democratic self-governance, not only in the political sense, but in the letting things grow organically from the bottom up, sort of antithetical to this idea of imposing a future vision from the top down. And I think they do have a future vision, a utopian vision. It's not a very coherent one, but it's sort of a world in which there is universal peace, there's universal equity, there's universal emotional safety, a sort of paradise in which no one is ever harmed, no one is ever limited, no one is ever no one is ever forbidden to do anything. Sort of everyone is self-actualized. And I think this sort of flows out of this very distorted liberal vision of total liberation. And so I think it is there. It's hard to describe this utopia because, frankly, it doesn't make any sense as a polity. But one very important thing is I think that this vision of total liberation of the individual, when you try to impose that in reality, the individual who wants to be totally free faces a situation in which others impose on them, because that's how society works. Others limit them in some way, whether that's the family ties that they may have. They have children, and so they're limited by their children. They have parents that they're born to that they're limited to. They have just colleagues they have to work with who they're impose various outside forces and views on them. Well, the only place they can turn to alleviate this friction between them and the world, they're looking to have someone make that go away. And the only place they can look to make that friction go away is the state. And so what ends up happening is the state says, okay, you want us to totally liberate you. You want total freedom. We will provide that freedom by keeping anyone from imposing on you. So you have the simultaneous growth of a mega state and the egocentric individual. And so you have both at once. You have the individual freedom and you have state power, and they're not actually separate. They're working in tandem to impose this sort of false utopia, and both have their own interests driving this combination, this actually begging by the liberated woke individual of the state to save them from society. And therefore we end up with essentially a totalitarian structure with the state and the individual, and the state contains the individual, and everything is within the state.
Do you want a quick response?
I would like it, but I don't want to hog the discussion.
Well, I'm not last. I mean, there is a next session, and the other question I had for you, I'm going to give to the next session instead. So you can actually respond if you wish.
Well, I mean, if you look at the new man, and you're right, because every social engineering movement had a vision of a new man. Adolf Hitler had this Germanic, man of steel. The futurist Italians had their vision of what a new man is. The Swedish Social Democrats. So the new man, but when you compare it to the new man of today, I don't know if the new man phenomenon emerged as this very feminist guy initially. The new man in the 80s was a new man who was very sensitive towards women and used the right kind of language. We're talking about there wasn't a social vision attached to that, the new man phenomenon in the 80s or the 90s, compared to what the futurists, what the Nazis, what Trotsky and Stalin argued in the past into what their vision of the new man, because that new man was bound up in a very clearly spelled out kind of society. Whereas today, what I find really sort of quite interesting is that their vision of the new man is a very modest one. The new man of today is somebody who shares, who's therapeutically dominated by the latest psychological diagnosis. And if you look at all the attributes of the new man, it's really about coping with the present in the here and now. And I think this is an important question, because for me, one of the reasons why I know our side will win eventually is because wokeism cannot inspire. Right? He hasn't got that kind of ideological capacity to inspire in the way that others have done in the past. Wokeism is marking time. It is living in the ever-present, and it wants to make the ever-present as comfortable, as safe. It wants to make the ever-present a safe space for as many people as possible. That's really what it's trying to do. And therefore, the problem that we have, the reason why I raised the question, is because if you have an ideology that doesn't have a clear name and it's not systematic, then we, on our side, have to explain to them what they really believe in, right? If you see what I mean. Because they're refusing to, and that's a double challenge for us conservatives. So we have got to almost like kind of explain to them who they are, what they're about, in order to win the battle of ideas.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. It's been a fascinating discussion. You're still around. We're going to take a 5-minute break while the chairs are arranged here. Welcome again to the final session, where we are going to make this a Q&A, since you've been passively sitting for most of the time, imbibing. Now you're a chance to get back at the speakers. So there is a young man with a micro. There he is. Can you? He will come to you. Would you? Anyone who let me ask for the first question?
Hi, my name is Theo Bash. I've been attending Danube for over 10 years. I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you. Exceptional presentations. A subject that really bothers me all the time is the situation of the WOK, because I have a WOK member of family. So I'll address my question today to Professor Furedi. Okay, exceptional presentation on WOK. So what do we do about it when we have WOK members in a family and we don't want to estrange ourselves from them? We want to keep talking to them. So how do you handle that part?
Well, I got some personal experience as a father. Look, there are two problems. The first problem is that conservatives, especially in the United States, have never taken education seriously. So most conservative parents would be unhappy if their child became a teacher. They would rather that they went to banking or to business or whatever. And therefore, the teaching profession is no longer inhabited by conservatives. In the old days, there would be a lot of, especially conservative women who were teachers, whereas now, when you talk to American conservatives, it's almost like they look down on teachers, as if they're, how would I want, that's not a career for my child. So therefore, it's not surprising that if our children are being educated by people on the other side, it's not surprising that they then become influenced by them. So that's just the background. So the trick that I used with my son, and it wasn't just wokeism. I mean, the first time I realized we live in a different world was when he came back from school every single day, basically talking about the environment. The geography lesson will be about environmental destruction. The Victorian age would be the horrible Industrial Revolution and how that destroyed the environment. So I realized that he's getting indoctrinated by views I didn't have. Then I realized that he was getting indoctrinated by what I call therapeutic values. My son was being told to look inside of him, share his emotion, all this stuff to make him feel mentally weak. And then, of course, came all the other stuff, the ones that we're discussing today. So what I basically did, and I told this to other parents who practice the same thing, if you want to keep your son or your daughter, do this. When they come back from school and they talk about net zero or they talk about how human beings are destroying the environment, the first thing you do is this. You tell them, this is what they say, but this is what the Furedis think. And that was the standard thing. This is what they say, this is what the Furedis think. Because what you then make, at a very early age, you make them aware that we are a really cool bunch of parents because we don't think like their school does. That we are proud people who think that our values are superior to the stuff that they're getting from their teacher. And you do that systematically all the time. And I think that works really well, and because it basically means that they have an independent alternative way of dealing with this thing. Now, once you lost your child, because you didn't do this, and the child has, gone on the dark side, then I think you got a big problem. And I think then you got no choice but to, number one, use your humor, sense of humor. Number two, bring out the contradictions. And finally, appeal to something that most kids have, which is their sense of origins. You know, where do you come from? You know, how did we manage to have a family? You know, what made us who we are? You know, what were the bonds and the values that made us, you know, kind of strong? And get them into a conversation like that, because even some really wokish kids, when push comes to shove, understand that their family is still important. Even when in public they wouldn't admit it, but deep in their hearts of hearts, they know that there's some emotional attachment. And I think we've got to be able to use that to win them back. But I think the key thing is not to lose them in the first place, but on the contrary, to make them culture warriors against the other side, get them to be subversive.
Thank you. I'm moving on to the next question. Thank you. By the way, I should just mention we have a new member of the panel and two distinguished guests have arrived. First of all, Philip Pilkington. Philip, welcome. Sorry you weren't able to come to field the economic questions in the morning because it meant I had to do it. and secondly, Professor Gergely Egedi is one of the most distinguished experts in English conservatism in Hungarian academia. Welcome. And Peter Pashtor. Yeah. Peter Pashtor is the editor of the magazine Országút, which is, again, one of the important intellectual magazines in Hungarian public life. So thank you both for being here. Thank you. Good. So I will now ask for another question to the gentleman just down there. Wait until the microphone arrives.
Thank you. This is for James Bennett. For years, I think 65 years or so, we've had MAD, mutual assured destruction, using atomic weapons. So everybody was pretty much aware that something that you're not going to do. Now, can you tell me what organization or group first decided that, or came to the publicizing the fact that we can use limited nuclear weapons without actually worrying about the other portion of it, which is MAD? Can you tell me where that philosophy came from? What country? What group?
Well, it's always been Russian military doctrine. It's always been Russian military doctrine, and I think a lot of the documentation that was released by Poland and some other ex-Warsaw Pact members after the end of communism in those countries enabled us to see that in a good deal of detail.
That's understandable. That was the doctrine during the Cold War with the Soviets, that they would use nuclear weapons in an invasion of Europe. But since then, I'm talking about since in the last maybe 10 years, where did the doctrine come up that we can use limited nuclear weapons? Because the Russians have certainly said that they will not use nuclear weapons.
They also said they wouldn't invade Ukraine.
More and more.
They also said they wouldn't invade Ukraine. They said that a couple of weeks before they invaded. I wouldn't take a Soviet or a Russian statement at face value, but in the couple of months after the start of the war, U.S. has intercepted field discussions between Russian commanders about whether they should bring the field weapons forward. And it's certainly not doctrine of any NATO country right now. The NATO country and other U.S. allies have a pretty strict doctrine of we only fire in exchange for an attack on us. But the Russians have said we will fire if there's been an exchange on us or if Russia is deeply threatened. And they have a couple definitions of what that would be, but I have a feeling it's up for negotiation.
Okay, my name is George Loringer. I've been here 35 years in Hungary. Came when the wall fell down. Let me give you this situation. You're talking about woke and that kind of stuff. All right, so we too much? Too loud? Yes. That's better. Okay, So we actually started a company here. We had about 600 people in the end. We actually started that company, and we had the staff, which is about half Americans and half Hungarians, come. And we would take off on weekends. And we'd ask them the question, how would you guys create a company? And we had this round table thing, because remember in those days, if you were Hungarian and you put your head above the radar screen, you got shot. And they had to get used to the fact they had to get their head above the radar screen more. So finally, we had these discussions and they would vote on it and they'd do all these things. And I ended up agreeing to about 98% of what they wanted to do as far as creating a company. But the real problem, the real thing, the benefit that came out of this was, instead of top-down management, this was now their idea. And when it was their idea, they ran with it. And they were excited. There were these people who were smarter than me and all kinds of stuff. They really did a great job at running their business. And I can't see where that philosophy shouldn't be more enumerated than this current woke stuff where they're trying to have a top-down management. Doesn't work. Thank you.
Any comments on that? Okay. Next, I think point worth bearing in mind. So. Next question. Yes, you see. Yeah. Come. I expect better of you. Yeah, okay. Well, 1 and 2. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Oh.
My question is about the North Africa and the Middle East relations of safety of with the safety of Europe and the Anglo-Saxon world. So, what's your opinion and also the threat of Islamism in the Western world?
Okay, and right away, let's ask Lana. Lana is one of our new fellows. Welcome.
Yes, I'm a visiting fellow of the Danube Institute. I'm from Australia. So I'd like to speak to the woke discussion. It made me think about, Frank, when you were talking about how conservatives, I suppose, laughed when political correctness became popular in the 90s, I suppose, and sort of dismissed this, didn't realize what it would turn into. I suppose woke is similar to postmodernism, more serious. And it made me think also about Nathan's point about how old conservatives, I suppose, don't understand that woke is different to the 68 generation. And it made me think about two things. First, the right really misunderstood, or they didn't realize how serious the attack on truth was, which is where this started, postmodernism, and it started in the universities. It was an attack on truth. But in the 70s, it was confined to the universities, really. Then the right helped, I suppose, turn universities into businesses, and you get this expansion of the professional managerial class and running things, and then you get policy that is infused with all of these ideas where truth is deconstructed. And so how did this happen? How did the right not see this or see it too late? And the other sort of thought I had was how this is linked to what I see as a crisis of representation, which we see in the referendums that we talked about. The right itself is not representing the people that are supposed to vote for, their usual constituents. So what do you think that the right should do in response to this? Particularly, I guess, in terms of education. Should we focus more on, say, private universities, the liberal arts colleges? What do you think?
Can I throw that first to Nathan and then to Frank?
Well, I think one aspect to woke that we haven't mentioned yet is that it is in part, I think, a product of what the anthropologists would call elite overproduction. So if in society there's a certain amount of people who run things, and we call them the elites, and obviously many people want to get to that social standing. And in our society, that's been sort of gate-kept by education. But when we started pushing more and more people to go to higher education, we started to produce more and more of the managerial class, more and more people who are educated and credentialed to take managerial positions. Then there were managerial positions, then there were elite positions. And so then you have a very intense competition between all of these people to about who's going to come out on top or who is going to be forced down back into the working class, and they don't want that. So what happens is two things. One is they become very competitive with each other and start designing strategies to undermine each other, and I think that's essentially what cancel culture is, a way to sabotage the competition for elite positions. But secondly, they start creating new jobs for themselves. And that's what a lot of the managerial expansion is. And sort of in this timeline that I think you started to discuss about what's different from the 60s. Well, since about the end of the 60s, the early 70s, if you look at charts of, say, lawyers per capita in the United States, for example, it's just exploded. Same with all kinds of administrative positions, say in the universities have essentially been taken over by administrators. Why is that occurring? It's because it's for two reasons. One, there's just a lot more people who want to be administrators or bureaucrats or lawyers, and they want to be that because they've been educated in that and there's no positions for them. So sort of the class creates its own positions in the apparatus. Apparatchiks, that's what they are. But the other thing is that the government has created these positions for them for their sake. So lawyers, for example, have exploded in the United States largely, at least in part, because laws like the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s has essentially created the need for lawyers to manage the interpersonal relationships within workplaces. So suddenly, in order to avoid lawsuits, you have to have a bunch of rules about who does what and who can say what and who gets hired, and therefore you need lawyers in your firm to police that, to create rules, and then you have new courts with more lawyers to police when there's violations of that, and so on. And so there's been an exponential explosion of positions that were created specifically to create, well, the Civil Rights Act is a good example of, something was created, but for good reasons to solve racial animus, but then the unintended effect of that has been, or the way it was implemented, we could say, has created this sort of explosion of managerial positions that feeds on elite overproduction and then encourages more production of those elites. So to your question of sort of education, I think, in my view, the unavoidable solution is we need to educate less people, or at least make the credentialing of people, credentialing is a better word than educating, because I think everyone should be educated to the degree they want to. But to sort of have this regime of making everyone go to college and get degrees to do work. I mean, people now need bachelor's or even master's degrees to do jobs that 30 years ago they wouldn't have even needed a high school education. So this has sort of been a huge problem, and I think the right, the conservative right, has an opportunity to say, as part of their broader program, you know, we're not going to make you go to college. College is a scam to get you to pay a lot of money and go into debt, and in order to fulfill an arbitrary obligation to have a credential. And we're not going to make you get that credential anymore. You can do this job, and you're not going to be indoctrinated at the same time. And so then you sort of cut out from below, cut the legs out of the woke indoctrination at the basic level, and sort of solve this whole problem, and at least in a strong blow.
Frank?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nathan is right. There's one problem, though, which is that's not going to work until we have more teachers who actually believe in education for its own sake, rather than being ideologically driven. And at the moment, the percentage of teachers, even in Hungary, who are on our side is a small minority. And it's getting smaller and smaller all the time. So that's a reality check on this. But the thing that we all have to understand, that the culture war will be won or lost in the schools. You know, we have to make sure that we don't lose another generation of young people to the other side. And this is really where the main battles need to be fought. And therefore, we got to figure out how we create new alternative educational institutions. It's really important. And the answer to all of our problems is that we got to create an alternative intelligentsia, a counterintelligentsia, almost Gramsci in reverse, where we create a group of people that are intellectually able to deal with these issues, not just able to deal with them, but are the gold standard intellectuals. And at the moment, we're struggling to accomplish that.
Well,
let me just finish. Yeah. So the question you asked about conservatives, why didn't they get it? Well, I think that they still don't get it. You know, I did an interview with a Hungarian newspaper this week called the Magyar Nemzet, where I made the point that the whole development of what I call in the West therapy culture, which is the medicalization of everyday life and the way in which existential problems are recast as kind of psychological ones, runs in parallel with Wokeist ideology. My friends who are Hungarian conservatives haven't got a clue about this. You know, sort of, they actually unwittingly accept Western ethos on parenting, the kind of child-rearing techniques where you are scared to tear your child off in case they stop loving you. I mean, all the things that we know are entirely dysfunctional. And I don't think that they get it. And they've never gotten it. And I just want to end on this. I remember a debate that I will never forget in New York, where I made exactly the same point to American conservatives about how, because at that point they were still saying that it's going to be within the universities only, and maybe here and there, but nowhere else. And it was just getting into business. And I said, look, what you don't understand is that there is no American institution that is insulated from this, the church or nothing. And I said, no, Frank, you're wrong. You know, we'll never come into business. You know, goes into business. And then one guy puts up his hand and he says, you know, Frank, I can think of one institution where this will never happen. And I said, what's that? And he said, sports, right? Sports. You know, sports with competitiveness, macho, blah, blah, blah. Well, look at, American football taking the knees. Look at the way that every single sporting institution has been colonized by these people. And even sport, which you would think that this is where American manliness and American competitiveness would actually stand up, is rolling over. They're even allowing transgender athletes a kind of space for that. So the point I'm making is that conservatives still don't get the scale of this attack, and they are not really armed. It's almost like the French fighting the Maginot Line against the Germans. That's really what it reminds me of.
Yes. Philip?
Yeah, I was just going to say something about the economics of what Nathan was talking about, because it's not actually widely understood, and I think if people did understand it, we could have an interesting discussion about it. So just to lay out some kind of boring economics jargon, productivity in economics is when you get more stuff, more production out of a person or out of their labor time. And if you look at productivity metrics in the United States, for example, one sector, well, it's a dual sector, but one sector consistently has negative productivity growth, and that's what's called edu-health, so education and healthcare. That means that they're adding people to this system, and they're producing less stuff relative to the number of people. It's negative productivity growth. Now, wages continue to go up in this sector, and if you see wages going up while productivity is either stagnant or negative, that means that an economic redistribution is taking place. You're leaching. You're not producing, but you're taking the wages. And then you can square the circle fully by saying, where are these wages coming from? They don't come from nowhere. Obviously, if people are buying something, that is paying the wages of the people who aren't producing, the negative productivity workers in the university system. Well, those wages are coming from student debt, from student loans. It's quite clear. And what is being created here, I think, I've called before, I haven't written about it, but I've said it to a few people, is a very similar to the early economy in Babylonia, where you have a administrative priestly class that sends people into debt. The administrative priests in Babylonia used to actually manage the debt themselves on cuneiform tablets. And they send people into debt, and with that debt, they both employ themselves, they grow as a priestly class, and they also build Babylonian temples, which is what pretty much university campuses are now. If you go to university campuses in the United States now, you'll see almost these temples being constructed. I mean, they're ugly, they're not particularly appealing, they're in fact vandalizing a lot of the time, but they're expensive and they're large. And if you go around, there's a whole economy of this. It's not just in America, but it's very striking in America, of university towns. Here. These are Babylonian priest temples that are being financed by student debt, and they are increasingly taking over the economies in the West. And they're not stopping. They're massively negatively impacting productivity growth. They're engaged in crass redistribution to a priestly class of people, and they're putting students, or in the case of Europe, governments, into debt in order to finance it. And I just kind of lay out, that's the economic structure behind what Nathan's talking about, and it's actually pretty scandalous.
Yeah. And once they...
Isn't it the case that most of the growth in the wage sector has been in administrators rather than instructors or healthcare actual physical providers?
Well, that's exactly it. It's the priest salaries go up. Look at the deans and so on. They do get large salaries, but it's their cadres that support them. But without the cadres, they probably wouldn't get the large salaries. It's a very, very corrupted system, and it's not widely understood economically, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, and moreover, Philip, I mean, we have explicit programs essentially say in the United States, if you graduate with debt from college, but you go into not only government service, but say nonprofit, if you join a nonprofit and you work for 10 years, your debt will be forgiven under the Student Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So that is the state financing its political client group, the specific class it is trying to grow, to encourage them to go through this system and to expand the Babylonian temple, and then the taxpayers will pay for it for you. And if you go off and if you join some other group, like, the private sector, then you won't get that. But if you join the nonprofit Borg, you will. But to the point on teachers, it's very interesting to me, Frank, that how was the teaching profession sort of colonized? Well, it's interesting that, only a few decades ago, you could be a high school teacher even with like a high school education. Now, not only do you need in the United States, not only do you need a bachelor's degree, you need a master's of education degree. And what are the single most woke schools on the planet? It's the education programs in the master's of education programs. And so they've created a credentialing system like a guild to enforce the ideology of new teachers and also to produce new teachers. And then you need new people to staff the new colleges of education programs and so on. So it expands permanently. And then to get accreditation to do a new school, you need to get accreditation through, guess what, the same guilds that do the education in the first place. So you're exactly right. You'd need a new intelligentsia, a new parallel system, including accreditation, schools, teachers, education programs for teachers, and so on.
Just a short comment. You know, I don't believe my eyes or ears to discuss how to improve our education system. It's a fundamentally wrong question. It's quite clear that the educational system can't be improved given all other existing realities of the system. You know, we understood very quickly after the fall of communism that you can easily change the mentality of people, the behavior of teachers, but you can't change the university system in the United States from inside. No. There must be a total shock, regime change, fundamental changing everything in the country, and then immediately even the schools and universities will change themselves. But to expect a change of the American university system from inside the university system is a total nonsense, impossibility. Please believe me. I remember when 3 weeks after the fall of communism, I became the Minister of Finance. And I remember my friends asked me after a month, have you fired all the people in the ministry already? And I said, you don't understand the situation. The ministry has 1,500 people. To fire them, who will be working there? Who will be debating just now the double taxation avoidance treaty with Indonesia? Who in the communist era is able to prepare himself for such a task? No one. Simply you have to change the system and to fundamentally change the way of thinking of people. But you can't change Harvard University by making better speeches in Danube conferences. No, that can't be done.
But there's one thing you can do, because your model of the financial ministry is absolutely right. You can't replace those things. But if we're able, and this is what I've been arguing in England, but also in America, if you can close down all the teacher training colleges and all the educational sort of institutions, nothing will be lost, because they don't have to be replaced. The point is that good teachers do not need to go to these institutions. Good teachers need to have a degree in their discipline. They have to be good mathematicians, good historians, good biologists. So to me, it is possible to think about how we build an alternative education system in the here and now. Because unless we do that, then we basically might as well slash our wrist and say that we lost everything. Because unless we can educate people, young people, in accordance with more enlightened, sort of Western values, then the problem just perpetuates itself. And as Nathan was indicating, we live in a world where to be a teacher these days does not depend on your discipline and knowledge. It depends on getting those bits of pieces of paper, which are totally useless, but nevertheless are necessary. So let's get rid of all of them.
Well, let me I'd like to take the question from George Loringer, who has disappeared again now, because I thought it got short shrift. I mean, George was pointing to the problem that in 1989 and 91, the communist system had left to the new democracies the problem of workers who said they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. Now, obviously, a workforce that is pretending to work is one of the major problems of a post-communist society. I'd like to to ask you, President Klaus, that's one of the first problems you had to solve. How did you solve that? The problem of a workforce that has been trained by communism not to work.
What was the question? Workers trained in the communist mindset. How do you solve that?
No, I disagree with the ambitions. Even Professor Furedi said, we want to educate. I wanted to jump. What do you mean by we? I don't want to educate anyone. Please don't try to educate anyone. It's a centralistic way of thinking. Please, no. You have to shake the system and to change it, and it works. It goes evolutionary, spontaneously. There is no masterminding of society. There is no masterminding of the transition from communism to something else. There is no masterminding of changing Harvard to, I don't know, to Chicago 30 years ago. It doesn't exist. You either change the mindset of people, the way of thinking of people in the United States, or nothing else is possible.
But how did you change the mindset of the Czech working class to make them more willing to be more enterprising and also to work more? Because, as I said, the famous expression was they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. That's an obstacle, isn't it?
No answers, no.
Okay. Right, another question before we end. I don't think anyone has asked a question of Marek. So I propose to ask for a question for Marek unless I will come up with one otherwise. Okay. Well, I'm annoyed with you again, but there we are. The question for Marek is, what you now have is a new government in Poland which seems to want to move back towards more corporatist attitudes in general. Is that true? And if it is, how do you deal with it? More central, following of central rules agreed in Brussels.
Well, I think one of the key problems of Poland ever since 1989 has been the lack of a substantial social stratum that is ready to move away from social democracy in terms of economic management. And this was very clear in the elections, where the only party that had an explicitly free market agenda in their electoral program, the Confederation Party, barely got into parliament. They got 7%. Poland has been plagued, essentially, apart from a very small, narrow period at the beginning of the transformation when Leszek Balcerowicz, who Professor Klaus knows very well, was the Minister of Finance. And he was actually undertaking his free market reforms at the cusp of the political changes when the parliament had not yet actually been democratically elected. And he exploited this vacuum in order to be able to implement quite radical policies of opening up the economy to foreign trade, stabilizing the zloty, opening up the process of privatization, and so on. But very quickly after that, the vested interest groups that had actually been gestated under communism, strong trade unions, strong agricultural lobby, strong welfarist lobby, strong pension lobby, reconstituted themselves in these interest groups and started to operate through both sides of the political spectrum. So both the Polish conservative right and the Polish liberal left actually have a great deal of consensus over economic policy and the need and the belief in a corporate economic model. And on top of that, of course, you had the influence of the Polish Catholic Church, which, although noble in many areas, actually also was heavily infused with Catholic social teaching, and also very critical of unbridled capitalism, as it was then called. So Poland, despite the So obviously Poland has had economic success over the last few years, but it's really been a function of, on the one hand, bouncing out of communism, the fact of a floating currency which allowed it to pass through the exigencies of the financial crisis relatively easily, and also infusion of EU funding as well as consumer-driven growth. So, but there is no real social consensus in Poland over free market economics. So the various brave attempts there have been to introduce a Thatcherite agenda have unfortunately been a failure. So Poland is not conservative in the free market sense. It is, of course, a large swathes of the population remain conservative in a social and moral sense.
Well, I think that's something Philip Pilkington might rather approve of, if I'm correct, remembering I chaired a session with him in London at a conference. But I don't think we have time to go into that at the minute. We've just reached literally the point at which we're supposed to persuade you all to leave the hall. So I want to thank everybody on the panel who's spoken today, and I think it's been an extremely absorbing conference. The quality of debate has been high. I've enjoyed it enormously. I think we benefited from the wildly different instructions we gave you as to what you were talking about. It's liberated us to talk about the things that liberated you to talk about the things that you felt important, and I think as a result it's been an extremely absorbing and pleasant day. Thank you very much indeed, Jen.